how you said that one day that your school was bombed? Were like schools one of the common targets for bombings because they didn't want like the kids to learn or anything?
Um, I I see. I cannot really truthfully answer. I don't know the answer. But there were special targets. I kind of doubt it because the Allied, what they were doing was carpet bombing. They were not interested in specific targets, except of course factories like the aircraft factory in Friedrichshafen. But for the rest of that was the game, if I may use that term. It was to inflict so much damage to the civilian population as possible. So they just went rolling in with hundreds of bombers and just covered the area with bombs. Friedrichshafen, however, was the town where we were supposed to go to school, but we couldn't. I went maybe for a month or two, but one day they said the school is gone. It was bombed out. So we had for 1 year had no schooling at all, and my elder sister and brother either they couldn't go to school, except then eventually we went to a little parochial school where we basically were in a single room schoolhouse of the kind you can see here in rural America still, and from place to place. It's the husband of who was a Nazi. The husband of one of the cousins of us. And he went to battle in Stalingrad. And he actually was, we don't know actually what happened. He was killed. But he had handed in his book and his passport basically to the authorities, knowing that we usually sign that did not expect to survive the battle.
He handed it in before he left? He handed in his passport before he even left for the front?
Yeah, he handed in the passport, and he was so disillusioned that he basically sought death.
You know, something that I take very serious, I'm a history teacher, right? I've got my history program. And it's pretty intense to know that young people are listening to you and you are influencing them. I mean, in my own little way with the kids we have in our program, but it's just, when you're teaching history, you're building ideologies in a way, and it's important that you try and do it in a way that's good for the world. As you can tell there was the Hitler Youth. What is your experience and knowledge of the Hitler Youth?
Well, yes. I was too young to actually join them. Also, I was forced to wear a brown shirt as a 2-year-old. One did that, and this was mandatory. The Hitler Youth, they were distinguished by their clothing, but this was a club I didn't want to have anything to do with, because one day my elder brother came home and he was very badly beaten up. Why? Because he came from Berlin. He was not a good Württemberger, and he came from he had an accent. He couldn't speak the same. This had nothing to do basically with the Nazis. It was this horrible bullying which goes on sometimes in schools, but it was also not stopped by the supervisors.
So you're probably thinking, fight it out, kind of environment. Speaking of brown shirts, I remember there was a quote by a high up Nazi who was the governor of one of the states. And he said about when there was the unemployment going on in, like you talked about, in the 29 depression, he said, if you don't have a shirt on your back, you can have a brown shirt.
Yeah.
And
that was
the Nazis really pushed that brown shirt idea.
Yeah.
How was life like back then?
Yeah, well, as I told you, the first post-war years were horrible, but within 5 years, I think Germany recovered. They called it the miracle of the German industry, You, as a historian, you might be interested that what helped the Germans immensely was the fact that the Allies came and took away all the industrial machinery, especially the Russians who were behind in industrial production. They were very keen to collect all these wonderful things the Germans had created during the Hitler years. Don't underestimate. This was a horrible time politically, but scientifically and technologically, it was very, very fruitful. The tanks came. My mother had forbidden me to go out and leave the garden. I couldn't do it, but I escaped, and I took my wooden rifle and went behind the tree trunk and shot at the French troop, who found it hilarious, except, and that's a memorable impression for me. Suddenly, an officer stopped his motorcycle, put it on the sidewalk, and ponderously got off the motorcycle and walked over to me and pulled me out behind the tree at the cruff of the neck, and took me a rifle and broke it over the knee and said something in French, which I didn't understand the word, but I still think what he said. These damn Germans, they even spoiled their children. They even made these into warmongers. And I think from that point on, I became a pacifist. And I was so impressed by this action.
How did you manage to keep a high national self-esteem, if you know what I mean? Because after the war, obviously, I can imagine people feeling perhaps depressed after, and maybe even ashamed, when it wasn't people's fault, really. It was just whatever. It was the regime that you guys had. So if you could perhaps speak about it, how you kept your morale and your self-esteem up?
Yeah, it was, it came, usually these confrontations occurred in the classroom, because the few teachers who came back, very often they were either damaged by the war experience, or they were not changed. They were still sort of living a Nazi philosophy, and that for me as a student became a difficulty. I was rebellious against some of the teachers because I did not accept them as my teachers, knowing that they had collaborated with the Nazis. Mm-hmm. And that it was very conflicting. And in particular, I'm thinking of a music teacher. He was a brilliant man, a conductor and choir practice. It was fantastic, and it was really charismatic. But he had a handicap in my mind, a moral deficiency, because he had been a high up guy in the Nazi hierarchy. He was what was called the Reichsjugendsingführer. This is a very, very complicated word, but he was responsible for indoctrinating of the people in music. So that was in the Göring and Goebbels department. He was a very high shot. So I never forgave him that, but it was a conflict, because on the other hand, he was a fantastic musician. I have to say that. And there were many teachers like that, but very few who did not come back without psychological damage. It didn't matter probably for math so much, but history, geography, philosophy, and this became problematic. And I finished high school in 1956 when eventually a new generation of teachers had grown up. But in the early 50s and late 40s, I was never very happy.
Thanks everybody for coming. Everyone, please take a second to say thank you to Ulrich.
Thanks for listening
Thank
to our.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you for showing up.
It was amazing. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for that, Ulrich. It was very educational.
Okay.
Yeah, that was very enlightening to hear. So thank you for
Very interesting.
taking your time. For
Enlightening
coming out.
things.
So worried I'm gonna pronounce the name wrong.
I have been pronouncing it wrong the whole time.
I see a C on my screen. Is that how I did? Is that the rating?
No, that's just the first letter of his first name. Google does that, I think.